Wokeness is killing gaming. Here we go. I have avoided the conversation around SweetBabyInc for so long, but now it's getting out of hand. Basically, when a game is being made, some people will hire them to help them out with writing a dialogue or character design of certain types of characters. Spoiler alert, it usually involves stories and characters that isn't the default. Now, anti-woke people caught wind of this and they flock to it like flies on a turd. They'll tell you that they're the reason why Kill the Justice League and Arkham Knight are bad games. They'll say they're the reason why Spider-Man is dating a deaf woman, why Joel lost in golf, and why they can't edge to their favorite characters. And it all sounds ridiculous because from the bottom of my heart, it is. But they won't mention that they worked on games like God of War Ragnarok, Alan Wake 2. They won't tell you precisely what they worked on. What pieces of dialogue did they add to what game and how? Because they don't know. It's not public knowledge. Some of the clowns are even going as far as to say they're the reason for the layoffs, which makes no sense. If you're still confused as to why something like this would exist, let me break it down to you. Let's say I'm a young black gamer who lives in Los Angeles. So I start a service to say, yo, if you come up with a character or a story that involves a young black gamer who lives in Los Angeles, you should talk to me about it, because I kind of know what that's like. So someone's creating a movie and they say, yo, we have this character who's a young black gamer who lives in Los Angeles. Would he wear something like this in the winter? I can then look at that character and say, add a little bit more drip here, add some drip there. Even though it's winter, we don't need a puff jacket, we're chilling. They say, all right, bet, move on. Second scenario, a show comes out. They say, yo, we got this character who's a young black gamer in Los Angeles. Would he say something like this? I say, we kind of over pronunciate our R's a little bit more, so it wouldn't be brother, it'd be brother. Now those movies, those shows, they come out. Some of them might still be trash. Some of them might be hits, but I did my job. The rest is up to them. That's essentially what SweetBabyInc does. That is in no way, shape, form, or fashion an issue with gaming. And it has in fact helped us get more interesting, better characters. Or else every character in the video game would still be like Aiden Pierce from Watch Dogs or Oh Boy from Days Gone. Sorry, that shit is boring.
Nigga, are you for real?
They'll tell you that they're the reason why Kill the Justice League and Arkham Knight are bad games. They'll say they're the reason why Spider-Man is dating a deaf woman, why Joel lost in golf, and why they can't edge to their favorite characters. And it all sounds ridiculous because from the bottom of my heart, it is. But they won't mention that they worked on games like God of War Ragnarok, Alan Wake 2. They won't tell you precisely what they worked on. What pieces of dialogue did they add to what game and how? Because they don't know. It's not public knowledge. Some of the clowns are even going as far as to say they're the reason for the layoffs, which makes no sense. If you're still confused as to why something like this would exist, let me break it down to you. Let's say I'm a young black gamer who lives in Los Angeles. So I start a service to say, yo, if you come up with a character or a story that involves a young black gamer who lives in Los Angeles, you should talk to me about it, because I kind of know what that's like. Now those movies, those shows, they come out. Some of them might still be trash. Some of them might be hits, but I did my job. The rest is up to them. That's essentially what SweetBabyInc does. That is in no way, shape, form, or fashion an issue with gaming. And it has in fact helped us get more interesting, better characters. Or else every character in the video game would still be like Aiden Pierce from Watch Dogs or Oh Boy from Days Gone. Sorry, that shit is boring.
Also, quick note: all I was doing that section, pulling out the franchises that have recorded ratings on their screen because they were media darlings. Funny little thing comes up. Every single one of the games that happen to have had a video shuttered or specifically resulted in a significant loss, including Kill the Justice League, they all seem to be missing these. Yeah, they all seem to be missing these ratings, the ones that exist, and doing a little bit of a deeper digging, it becomes very clear and obvious why they don't have them. So, like, media literacy and media pedigree. You guys probably should you should probably look into them things. Yeah. Maybe you know what the fuck you're talking about when you decide to say, yeah, they have ratings and they don't talk about the fact that they happen to be a part of some of the games that are good. Because you see, the entire point is that they want you to say they're not giving us our due diligence because they're not giving us the credit of us being on the project. Because they were consulting on characters with the focus specifically on representation, which is why Angura Rhoda is black. And they've specifically worked on character arc voices and sensitivity reading, which is why everything that is there in Alan Wake 2 is there in Alan Wake 2. You don't get to you don't get to be stupid like this. That's the entire reason why it's pedigree farming. Attach yourself to a project that was already successful, and then fuck it up to the point where you have the Spanish audiences lambasting your localization effect, and you get the wrong flag for your black Hispanic origin character. But you know, what do I know? I'm just a child.
Hi, I'm Kim Belair, and I'm CEO of SweetBabyInc. I got my start in this industry and in writing in general at a very young age. I think ever since I was in high school, I have wanted to write, but I never really saw it as a viable path forward. And so I went into marketing. I got a degree in marketing. I worked in brand voice, but it was always this thing that was pulling me back, right? There's always copywriting. There's always little bits of story that you can tell even about a brand. And so I kind of took it into, brand stories, brand voices, and eventually I couldn't deny that I wanted to be creative. And so I started getting into more creative work. I did comics, I did a book, I did short stories. And then eventually, while I was working still in marketing, I was approached by a video game company where I got my start. And I first got in as a community developer, then became a writer and a narrative designer. And what I noticed even in that industry was I had finally embraced the fact that I wanted to write, that I wanted to tell stories. And I realized that it wasn't always something that was left to people demographically like myself. And I started to realize that, there weren't a lot of mentors that I could look to. There weren't a lot of people ahead of me. And I started to realize there's no path forward unless I kind of make it myself. So in 2018, one of my best friends and I, we teamed up and we founded a company, and the original desire was just to write together. We wanted to write with the two of us and a friend of ours, and we wanted to write games, but we realized that as a unit, we were capable of, doing for others what had not been done for us, which was to support us, to empower us, to lift us up, to value our talent, and to help build our skills. And so today, what we do is writing, narrative design, story building, story breaking as our first and foremost, but on a secondary level, we work very hard to get marginalized talent into the industry, to protect them the way that we would want to have been protected, to lift them up, and to get them into an industry where they're too often shut out. And basically, I think to take over in the hopes that some really dope people will be able to lead into kind of a new era for an industry that's been kind of, the same way too long. I think what's inspired me as a writer, as a CEO, as just a person in this industry is seeing how much incredible work comes from places that we don't expect. I think that there's this path that we take, and especially when we have a single career, when we're kind of trying to build our own path forward, we get tunnel vision, right? We can only see ahead of us. And I think what's been inspiring has been to kind of get to where I'm at now, be able to take a step back and to see all of the people who are fighting, who are working, who are telling stories alongside me, and to realize that like we're all in this together has been a huge, part of my inspiration after a time when I really did think, or I did feel that I was relatively alone. I think I would tell my younger self if I had a chance to see her that one, it's okay. You're you're not as uncool as you think. You're not super cool. I'm not saying anything here, but you're not as uncool as you think. And I think I would also tell her that the things that she's doing are worthwhile. The things that she's writing are better than people are making her feel that they are, and her skills are there, and she deserves to be heard even if she doesn't always feel like it. Because I think that I look back and I think I spent a long time thinking that I wasn't good enough, and I wish that I had had the strength then and the knowledge to know that I could get here, and that I would get here, and that it wasn't all for nothing. I think to protect myself and for my own mental health, I've made sure that I work with people I really, really care about and really, really respect and really, really enjoy working with. I often talk about the fact that like video games are such huge projects, right? And they feel like they're these huge works of creative brilliance, and they take so many brains, but for me, I would much rather work on something that is an okay project with great people who I care about, who lift each other up, who provide like a sense of balance, than something that is, maybe technically very proficient, but it was hell to make and the people aren't empathetic. So for me, I make sure that, the work feels good, that we're always being kind to each other, that I'm always having fun, and that I can at least laugh a little bit every day. And I also make sure that, when it comes time to have my time for myself, this is something I'm still learning to do. I try to make it. I try to say, okay, maybe I didn't accomplish everything I wanted to do today. I'll do it tomorrow, and I'll feel a lot better if I just if I just rest. So it's those two things. It's the people in my community, the people in my circles, and allowing myself space to sit back and think sometimes. I'm Kim Belair. I'm a writer, I'm a narrative designer, I'm extremely nervous, and I'm the co-founder of a little narrative development company called SweetBabyInc. We do narrative development in games and kind of beyond, and we try to bring a lot of inclusion, diversity, and new ideas kind of to the industry. So just as a kind of fun fact, last year was actually my first GDC, and I first pitched this talk as part of the program Amplifying New Voices, if anyone has heard of it. Yes. I think it's also kind of appropriate that that's where I talked about this, because it's also what my talk is about in a lot of ways. So hi. For a little bit of background on me, I've been a professional writer for about 12 years, but I've always written stuff. I think that's always the way. But when I was a kid, and I want to start at the beginning here because I think that it's important to kind of give context to the way I learned about representation as a woman of color, and I think the way that a lot of marginalized people kind of get socialized when it comes to topics like this. So when I was small and starting to kind of express myself creatively in either writing or stories or art, I wrote about myself a lot, and I would put myself into a lot of art, into a lot of narratives, and I put my family and people who looked like me in all these cool scenarios, and I was telling all these stories where I got to see myself, I got to see people who looked like me, and kind of a rainbow of people who were kind of adjacent to me in a lot of ways, and I think it was really neat, and I was really fostered in that. So when I hit elementary school, I think that I was free to tell those stories, because a lot of the stories that you hear in elementary school are about like, we should be friends with everyone, we should be inclusive, we should preach equality and build communities, and I think this was really, really wonderful. But then I got to high school, and suddenly, for the first time in my life, I got told that the stories that I was writing, the things that I was creating for and about people who resembled me, were not real stories, and they were not right stories. And this was to the point that I received a list that I'm sure many of you have received that was, here's a list of authors and stories that are legitimate. Here's a list of people and stories that are important. And as you can imagine, they were, mostly men and almost exclusively white. And so were the subjects of all these stories, with a couple exceptions of people who were there to teach lessons to the
white male characters, or people who were there to express pain, or people who were there to be the target of some kind of hate or conflict. And if we ever did read, here's a book by like an African-American author, here's a book by a woman, here's a book by a Japanese author, it was for a lesson that was about, this is what life is like as a woman, this is what pain and suffering is like as a black person, this is what pain and suffering is like as a Japanese person. And so through that, and kind of unconsciously, I started to learn that books by and about white men were literature. They were classics, they were important, and everything else is just special interest. They were very, very niche. And then meanwhile, there's like a young me, and all I wanted out of this whole life was to be a writer. And I wanted that so bad that I kind of said, okay, well, what do I need to be legitimate? And I just internalized everything that I had learned. And I did that for years. And I spent like actual years just writing about white men. Because I thought, okay, I'm making art now. Because I can look at the stories that are being told, that are being held up as legitimate and as classic, and they look like the stories that I'm telling. And for so many years I did this, that I think it was probably only in my early to mid-20s that I started to realize that I had internalized this like deeply, deeply uninteresting idea that in terms of narratives and stories, white and male are neutral and universal. And I say that even as a woman of color, so while we don't all fall into that trap, I say it to kind of illustrate how easy it is, I think, for us to kind of take on that narrative even as people who are marginalized, even as we're fighting. Because we've kind of created this normal that we all unconsciously follow, and it affects us even as we advocate for change. There are things at times, like back in the day, if you'd asked me, oh, are you doing this on purpose? Are you only telling stories that fit the dominant narrative? I would never have said yes. But I think that a lot of people end up doing it even as they're saying we have to do better. And I think that that's actually shown in the way that we manage representation, which we still consider it this like deviation from something that is normal. And representation is this like very, very scary and very uncertain thing. And if we do it wrong, or if we don't do it, accurately, or if we kind of take a risk, we may get shut down, and that fear is enough to stop us. And I think like that sucks. And it's such a bummer because it's the only way sometimes that we end up talking about it. We end up saying we're going to share our stories of microaggressions, which I am going to do today, but we share stories of trauma and of doubt. And when we're dealing with narratives in advocacy, we end up going like, okay, these stories are stirring and they're beautiful, but they're also very sad and very heartbreaking. And I think it's important to do that. It's important to share like all of those painful stories if we're going to actually understand the struggle and convey the struggle. But I think today I'd like to take a moment and kind of assume the best, because I want to assume that all of you are here in this advocacy talk because what I've said so far is already familiar, already painful, and I want to kind of assume that you have sat with that, or if it's not your experience, you've already sat and listened to that in other areas. And rather, I think, than spending the next 15 or so minutes kind of sitting in that pain, I want to share some examples from my own experience, and then kind of discuss how we can do better and find different and more interesting ways of talking about this stuff as creatives and as advocates and as people who overall want practical solutions to these kinds of problems. I was consulting on a project that was a dating simulator, and I was faced with like a very simple decision point that the writers were trying to achieve, and it was this interaction between the female identified date and you, the protagonist, and you can customize your gender, you customize your appearance and everything. So the love interest is on a date with you, and they ask you a very simple question, and it's, what was your ex like? Which is a bit much for a first date, but the player can either choose to say, okay, my ex was a good person, but it didn't work out. They can choose to say, I don't know if I really want to talk about that, or they can choose to say, my ex was a monster. And choosing my ex was a monster, the woman on the date with you goes like, yikes, you must be so immature if that's what you're going to say on a date about your ex. Like, you must be not over this, you must be figuring something out. And I think that you lose favor in that moment with that character. And I can see where the design was. Like, I understand that what they wanted to do was just have a very simple question where if you respond, your ex or your date can say, I like that, or I don't like that, or kind of be neutral about it. But I played through that and I realized something that they hadn't really seen, and it's that this question was deeply gendered, despite the fact that they didn't even intend that. When we treat, I guess, cis, hetero, male characters as the default, we end up with questions like this. And I say that because while it's a generalization, when we have those characters and they say something like, hey, my ex is a monster, what we're being asked to assume is that that person has a crazy ex-girlfriend. We're being asked to assume that they're being immature, or they might have, a real heartbeat at home. It's almost like a laugh line a lot of the time. So I asked, hey, what if I'm playing as a woman? Because what I had to explain very delicately was that if I'm playing as a woman, and I'm assuming that I'm interacting with a woman, and we don't know about my ex, there's an upsettingly high likelihood that when I say to another woman, my ex was a monster, what I'm referring to was an abusive situation rather than just an immature joke. And so I actually said, you know what though, don't worry about it. We can create a condition for this, because if you respond to that person by saying, hey, my ex was a monster, what if she digs a little deeper? What if she checks and says, hey, is that a pain point for you? Or says like, oh, is that something touchy for you? Or maybe says like, do you mean that as a flippant remark? Because I think that even though, this game is light, it would be a genuinely important moment to be able to express that sentiment in a game. And when I suggested that, the writing team was like, okay, thank you for this insight. And then they just like took it away. They got nervous, and I think that is the problem that we face when we think of representation as a challenge that we just need to like surmount. We just like, oh, nope, solved, we did, because we took it away and we don't have to face it anymore. But I thought here, this was an opportunity for innovation. Here we had a chance to make a woman who's been victimized see herself in a game, be able to express something to another woman in a game, and kind of actually relate to it. And we had that opportunity, but instead we pulled back because we thought it was safer not to push forward. And after the whole thing was done, the team thanked me again, and they said like, thanks so much, you really mitigated the risk. And I think that the way that we talk about this kind of thing is itself a problem. We need sensitivity readers, we need risk assessment. And these are like, again, important services that I literally like list on every PDF that I send out to be like, hey, I can do risk assessment and sensitivity reading. But I think when we do that kind of work, we make it seem like what we're doing is, being very careful, being very scared, we end up just kind of sanding down all the rough edges instead of building something new and building something out. And that means that we feel daunted when we discuss representation, because we talk a lot about representation as the mitigation of pain, but we don't talk about representation as a creator of joy. Because I would genuinely love, just once, to be called into one of these consulting sessions, and instead of being asked like, hey, can you tell us how this is going to hurt people like you, just be asked, hey, what would you like to see people like you do in this game? What experiences can people like you bring to the world of the game that we haven't seen before? What's a cool thing that you want to see from characters who look and act like you? And it's not the way we're taught to talk about it, but I think it could be. Because even when we're doing narrative design, we're looking at archetypes every time we want to have a set of answers, right? We're looking, this is what a rebel would do. This is what a jerk would do. This is what a more straight-laced person would do. And I think I would love to start thinking about more like, what option can we make for people who haven't been seen? What can we add that provides a new perspective that we've never explored before? Joy for me, and she's my best friend, so she has to be happy about it. And her response, while not surprising, was still very touching, because she said, I've never seen that either. And holy moly, that's cool. And I told some other friends at that point, I was kind of like excited about it, and they weren't all black, these friends, they weren't all targeted by this moment that I had experienced, but they all felt the same thing when they heard me tell my story, when they heard that it was a new kind of term, and the general idea was, holy moly, representation is cool. But in my Mass Effect experience, this is almost an accidental form of representation, because it's something that the possibility is not guaranteed for any player depending on the kind of character and the commander shepard that you make. So I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if this wasn't an accident, but it was actually the intention of the game designers? What if they actually said, you know what, we're going to set out to create a moment of joy in people who look like this, people who feel represented by this? And that I think would be amazing, and it's totally possible for us, because these are things that we can actually create as designers and as writers and as creators. And not only are they new, but they're very, very narratively compelling, and I think that's ultimately what we should strive for. Because the newness of it works not only for those who are, being immediately targeted, but it works for everyone in that group, everyone who kind of receives it and who's never seen this before. Because keep in mind that when it's new for you, odds are they've never seen it either. So you're not actually catering to one tiny group, you're catering to everyone who's going to be playing it. It's across the board. And that's a lesson I think that we keep failing to teach. Because we keep saying, okay, this one's for you guys, this one's for you guys, like this one over here, like you can have it. But we can't keep looking at representation as like we're catering to a tiny little corner or like a direct marketing effort. It's what everyone, I think, or hope wants as an audience. And stepping back, it's not just, I don't just hope actually. I actually think, okay, we all do want this. And I think, especially the people in this room can actively say, yeah, that's what we want to achieve. But then the question is, why aren't we doing this? Like why, when we're talking about it, when we're so enthusiastic about it, what's stopping us? Like why are we still being told, oh no, that's not what players want? Why do I keep hearing that it's like an uphill battle for people to bring representation to what should be a very inclusive environment of creativity? And I think, there are a lot of answers. There's the fact that, the industry's stuck in its ways. The industry isn't as diverse as it should be or could be. We're all socialized in this society to kind of act against it and to fall into what is normal. And there's like a dozen other answers that are all like variations on those themes. But kind of like a pseudo fun fact about me, that's slightly fun, is I actually have a marketing degree. And so I want to put on that like very mercenary hat for a second and talk about the way that we decide how we're going to sell the art that we make and how we're going to approach the audiences that we make it for. Because I think so often when people like us get told, from higher ups or from society at large, this isn't what players want, it's not a conversation about demographics or content, it's a conversation about demographics. And I think that in our industry and in so many creative industries, if you want to look at film and television and any art form, we start treating our core demographics as a fixed and static value, something that does not want to change, something that is locked in place. So despite like the changing face of audiences, despite the changing face of conferences like this one, we still look at our core demographics and say, okay, they're white, cis, hetero males, and we cater almost exclusively to them. And the problem is that we don't just cater to them like, here's something that we think you'll enjoy. We cater to them the way that we cater to like a picky baby. We feed them the same thing that we know they love. We keep on feeding it. Like, here you go. You love it. Eat this, eat this, eat this. So that then when they get anything else, they react as a picky baby would, which would be like, oh, no, thank you. I do not want this. And we've actually done this so long that what we're doing is creating an entire nation of picky babies, and they make us scared to deviate from what we actually want to do, just in case these picky babies don't want to play our games. And we've made a lot of progress. Obviously, like I don't say this to completely go like, just give up. We've screwed it. But I think it's still amazing that I can be seated in a meeting and told that out of 12 characters, we already have one black one, so there can't possibly be a second. I get that way too much. And I once worked on a project where they had an all-white cast, and they expressed their desire, like, okay, we need to mix it up a bit. How about this character's kind of like stereotypically French? So they have a beret and they have like a striped shirt. And I was like, okay, if you need to do that, can we at least make them a person of color? And they said, oh no, that would be weird. They're already French. So I want to do better than this. Because, and I don't say that to be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to dismiss all the hate and the abuse in our communities. But I do like to imagine that when we look at white guys, and there's several of you here, I think that when we look at you, we say, okay, you can't possibly enjoy this. But I think they want also, and maybe you want also, to experience new and different stories. I think we need to step out of this rule that like white men can enjoy fantasy worlds, aliens, sci-fi, monsters, anything, so long as it's through a lens that looks exactly like them. Because if that's the kind of person that we're always going to cater to, you're never going to innovate. You're never going to change things. You're going to keep feeding the picky baby. And we cannot continue to try to create art under a system that is going to bar innovation for fear of a picky baby throwing a tantrum. And I really don't think that it's impossible to change this, because as like a woman of color, I have played with and like empathized with a lot of white men. I have played as Kratos, who's like literally white. I've played as Nathan Drake. I've played as Arthur Morgan, and I've loved it. And I don't think it's like pie in the sky thinking to go like, hey, maybe we can invite white dudes to play as other people and experience different things through someone else's eyes. And if they don't like it, we have to start thinking we're not losing, they're losing, and we're losing because we're going to let them stand in the way of our progress and our innovation.
We need to put pressure on them, right? We need to either make them fear in some way that they're not, that they're not going to sell their game, or they could sell their game more if they did this. That somehow challenging them and making them feel like they have to do this, they have to include this, because then they're going to be like behind the times. And I think we do that by continuing to put pressure, by continuing to critique.
If you're a creative working in AAA, which I did for many, many years, put this stuff up to your higher ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
Now, those movies, those shows, they come out. Some of them might still be trash. Some of them might be hits, but I did my job. The rest is up to them. That's essentially what Sweet Baby Inc. does. That is in no way, shape, form, or fashion an issue with gaming.
Hey, maybe we can invite white dudes to play as other people and experience different things through someone else's eyes. And if they don't like it, we have to start thinking we're not losing, they're losing, and we're losing because we're going to let them stand in the way of our progress and our innovation.